So you're making the mitochondria more resilient, and you're also giving your tissues a greater metabolic mitochondrial capacity because it's stimulating mitochondrial biogenesis and also stimulating autophagy. You're clearing out dead and damaged cells, and you're also stimulating mitophagy, which is you're clearing out the mitochondria which are not working so well and regenerating new, more robust mitochondria.
Let's talk about, I know you've been so generous with your time and information. I just want a couple things. Where do you see kind of the relation between metabolism and epigenetics, ketogenic diets, and kind of where your research is going? Like where do you see the ship going over the next 5 to 10 years, both maybe in the high performance world of military and space exploration? Obviously these are extreme environments, but also how does that translate into the everyday person in the world? Because obviously we see this massive rise in type 2 diabetes. We see all this, high sugar, and then there's also a lot of alcohol-based sugar diets and stuff like that. So there's a lot of hidden components. Where do you see all this going, and what do you see happening over the next 5 to 10 years with all this? You talked a little bit about tech. Feel free to unload. I love to see where things are going. It's always fascinating to me.
Well, I'm a little biased in that I think metabolic control and metabolic parameters really drive our health in general, but also our gene expression, right? And it doesn't have to be so complex. So we tend to focus in our lab, in the context of cancer at least, on the glucose ketone index. So the average person has a glucose level that's like at least 25 times higher in millimolar concentrations than ketone levels, right?
Wow.
So if you go into fasting, 24-hour fast will probably get you pretty close to a ketone glucose index of maybe 2 or 3, and a really strict ketogenic diet followed for a protracted period of time could get you a glucose ketone index of 1 or 2. So we're talking then the average glucose being about 4 or 5 millimolar. In US we use milligrams per deciliter, but if so 80 milligrams per deciliter is like 4 millimolar, something like that. If you can, and ketones are essentially zero, right? I mean, with the standard American diet.
Right.
But if you can adjust your diet or do fasting periodically and get your ketone levels into that range where your glucose ketone index is like 1 or 2. So a glucose ketone index of 2 would be a glucose level of 4 and beta hydroxybutyrate level of 2 millimolar, which is pretty easily achievable. It's probably where I'm at right now. And if you can just do that, if people can do that intermittently, that is going to have a pretty profound effect on gene expression. And it's going to have a profound effect on, things like the things that we measure, like high sensitivity C-reactive protein, hemoglobin A1C is going to come down, your insulin's going to come down, and that insulin suppression and all the downstream pathways impacts so many different functions in the body and your immune system. So you are also stimulating the mitochondria to work a bit harder, and through, you might want to call it a hormetic regulation. It's a mild, stress initially, but you're forcing mitochondrial biogenesis, you're forcing an upregulation of enzymes associated with the electron transport chain. So you're making the mitochondria more resilient, and you're also giving your tissues a greater metabolic mitochondrial capacity because it's stimulating mitochondrial biogenesis and also stimulating autophagy. You're clearing out dead and damaged cells, and you're also stimulating mitophagy, which is you're clearing out the mitochondria which are not working so well and regenerating new, more robust mitochondria. So the health of the mitochondria is intimately associated with the DNA repair. So I guess stated another way, the fidelity of the nuclear genome is tightly regulated to mitochondrial function. So if we have robust, healthy mitochondria making lots of ATP, that's our energy currency, that ATP will assist in DNA repair and also epigenetic regulation in a positive way. So if we enhance the bioenergetic state of the cell, we're going to have more robust DNA repair, more robust transcription, protein synthesis, yada, yada. And that, so therefore, optimal epigenetic programs or gene regulation will be contingent upon the health and vitality of metabolic control, which comes down to mitochondrial function. And we know from lots of research that caloric restriction, fasting, and quite a bit of data is showing ketogenic diets can. Some data would indicate that the ketogenic diet needs to be calorie restricted. So producing a calorie deficit can produce remarkable effects. But if you have a protracted calorie deficit, then you can cause pathological consequences. So the dose is very important. So intermittent periods of, ketogenic diet, intermittent periods of fasting, I think are important because you need to reintroduce calories and nutrients for sufficient repair of tissues, anabolic processes. The immune system can be compromised with too much restriction. So this where it kind of falls back to, monitoring systems, right? And also, bodybuilders or physique athletes or athletes know this too, just your performance. So your performance, we can't forget that there's a lot of tech out there that can help us, but how we perform on a daily level, our daily basis, our energy levels, our strength levels, our body composition changes all need to be factored in and correlated with various, biological measurements too.
So to summarize, I would say, based on what you've said, it seems that periodic calorie restriction, getting fat adapted through a ketogenic diet so that you can build those metabolic products and you can and easily transit into periods of fasting, seem to have profound effects on energy metabolism, like through the mitochondria, as well as potential repair dynamics when it comes to DNA, as opposed to, say, eating 6 times a day like the average bodybuilder or the average American person who's stopping at every couple of hours on the highway to get another hit of sugar and stuff. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the point where you want to, if your glucose levels are low and stable, and that is, in my opinion, optimal, because very large fluctuations in glucose levels, that relative change in glucose levels and insulin levels can kick off a lot of signaling cascades that can be pathological or have negative health consequences. So if some of the things can be benefit in regards to tissue repair, right? So insulin's an anabolic hormone, can aid, it can be anti-catabolic and anabolic. But if you're doing that every day, sitting at your desk, eating carbohydrates, then that will contribute to progressive insulin resistance and metabolic derangement and chronic systemic inflammation, which kind of characterizes a large percentage of the population. But carbohydrate restriction, intermittent fasting are ways also to moderate just total calories, right? So we inadvertently reduce our caloric load if we eat less carbohydrates, because I think there's a hedonic effect to eating carbs, especially carbs and fat together. And that can contribute to surplus amount of calories, and it's really that calorie load. But some people are just truly carbohydrate intolerant, and that can dysregulate their metabolism. I, you know, I was sort of the opinion that the calories were almost all that mattered. Like I'm kind of in between this argument of like calories in, calories out, and but have observed in myself that I could eat a tremendous amount of protein and fat more than it actually makes sense, and my glycemic control is still remarkable, and insulin still stays low. If I do a cardiometabolic test and measure, inflammation markers and hemoglobin A1C, it looks remarkably well on a high calorie ketogenic diet. So I think that just goes to show I'm sort of genetically hardwired to work really well with this diet. I have not, I know you're on a plant-based diet. I've been wanting to do a plant-based diet experiment, and it would be nice, with CGM to do that, to construct a vegetarian diet and maybe even a vegan diet and follow that for a period of time where a large percentage of the macronutrients are carbohydrates. So, but I think I'm pretty metabolically flexible where I adapt pretty well to that.